Thank you all very much for coming out this beautiful evening and breaking from the spring a little bit. Although I do think that we should move this meeting out to the outside, but that's just me. So I'd like to call to order this work-study session for Independent School District 624. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Beloit. Here. Chapman.
Here.
Ellison here. Mullen.
Here.
Newmaster. Here. Thompson. Here. Arcan.
Here. All right, and now we will move into our first discussion item, the overview of the school boundary adjustment policy. Mr. Wald, is that correct?
It is. Yeah, thank you, Chair Mullen, members of the board, Dr. Kazmerchek. You'll recall that our last enrollment study of August of 2018 helped inform our facilities referendum. It identified need for additional classroom space, and so to that end, we have a new elementary school in Hugo that will be opening in the fall of 2022. So there's an obvious need for us to study and develop attendance boundaries as our new school is opening. We're working with TeamWorks International experts in this area who will assist us in the process. Leading the work will be Dennis Cheesebrough, excuse me, Dennis Cheesebrough, a former parent of students in our district, and his colleague Ray Queener. Dennis and Ray will describe the process that we'll be using for studying our attendance boundaries. Dennis,
All right.
Ray?
All right, thank you. I'm Dennis.
And I'm Ray.
Good to be with you. We're just going to take some time, and what we hope to do in the next half hour or so is kind of talk about the research and data system that's being used behind the scenes for doing modeling and analysis, to talk a little bit about the process design and some of the tools that we're going to ask for some of your feedback and questions that you may have as board members. Talk about the facilitation of that process and the decision-making process that goes with that. So today will be about process design and kind of setting the stage for what will happen both this summer as well as next fall. So some of the elements of the project that have been put together is, as you may or may not be aware, years ago you utilized our school analytics services for projections of enrollment and things like that that help form the basis of your high school design and your elementary schools. And we have updated that from 2017 to this year to all of the new student enrollment, demographics, housing sales information has all been already uploaded into the system and has been provided online now as an online service to the Office of the Superintendent. That will be the basis of research. So when we look at enrollment projections and we look at boundaries, we're able to model both now and into the future, not only numbers of kids, but profiles and descriptors of kids and what the schools and different ideas for attendance areas may look like. And the process will inform and influence the enrollment options design, but there's also, we'll get into just a moment, there's a number of variables that have to be taken into account as we go through the modeling, and that will influence the public engagement process that will occur next fall. We're going to be using two different frameworks that we find that work real well. One is a guiding change, which is a document we're going to show a draft of to you tonight to get your feedback, which is why are you doing this as a district? What results would you as a superintendent and board wish for any option to provide for? The what? And unacceptable means what will not be pursued in developing enrollment options and attendance areas. So a guiding change document serves as a public document that's kind of like a safety net for the whole process because everyone can look and see the why, the what, and the not how. And so it leads to an understanding and transparency, as well as a decision-making framework, roles, responsibilities, the sequence of the process we believe should always be public and easily accessible. The process timeline, as you can see just in broad strokes, is from now through August. We'll be organizing a design team of people in the district with knowledge who we will work with in developing some preliminary options that we can take out into the public part of the process, so that we do a process with the public that already has some research and background already done that meets the guiding change document, that we're not having meeting after meeting with just a blank slate asking people, what do you think? We're looking at data analysis and modeling. October, November is what we call input teams. That's where there's public engagement through teams and through open public process, typically surveys or what we call meeting packets on the web. So anybody can look at the information and respond with what they see are the strengths, the concerns, and ideas for improvement. One thing I would offer for you as a district and as a board to recognize is that when you do public engagement process, you have to be open to refining the design. Otherwise, why have public engagement? And to let you know that in the nearly 20 years we've been doing this, I can tell you that every single time a district has used this process, the design has changed. Every single time. And so it's that ability to work with the public and say, oh, there's ideas and things that were not thought of. So the design team and the input team work together. Eventually, our hope is that in November, December timeframe, options that can be implemented would come to you as a superintendent and as a school board to make your decisions based upon management and governance. And then you move from that point, you move into implementation. So I know there's a lot on there, but any feedback or questions on the services, and we'll be going through the variables in just a moment, but just the process timeline.
Questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much.
All right. So some of the variables that we've been working with Assistant Superintendent has been we'll be working on what are your ideal school and maximum capacities based upon education program, your policies and your practices. Well, it's easier with new schools, but sometimes you have to dive into the design of older schools and just take a look at what really is the capacities. And based upon the educational program that you want to either refine or put into place over the next 5 years, what's the data and information about the actual conditions of the school? We also have been talking about enrollment recovery for next year and beyond. So most school districts lost enrollment in the past year. And what we find is districts have completely different ideas about the recovery of those numbers and students and what they may do. That's going to impact this design. As well as the Distance Learning Academy. What is its ideal and maximum size? Which again has influence on all of this. And then we're going to talk a moment about market share target. Maybe you want to cover that.
Yes, we define market share as the percentage of students in any region that are attending White Bear Lake area school, whether that's an attendance area, a district boundary, or even a census subblock area. So with the tool that we have brought online, we have the ability to look geographically at the census block, at the attendance area, or even district-wide. So we can talk about targets at all three of those levels. That's a newer strategy that we're able to have that level of conversation with the tool that we're bringing to the school district at this time.
So we'll be talking about that as well as what you're very well aware of is housing development. And just to give you a sense of scale, we've worked with many school districts in areas of housing development. We call housing development growth that you can see. Market share is growth that you don't see. And the reason why we've looked at this and developed this approach is we found a number of districts where their market share targets equals new development in actual numbers. And since you don't see it, you don't take it into account. So we're already having the discussions about strategies about both of those, market share growth, housing development, and generational change, which you're going through in certain of your areas right now, is when you see concentrations of homes that have been owned for more than, where you have the coming together of homes that haven't sold for more than 25 years, people age 65 and older, when you see concentrations of those, we are actually monitoring housing sales on a monthly basis, building on a quarterly basis, and we begin to look for what we call generational sales. Well, there's not many kids from, let's say, a 4 or 5 square block area, and all of a sudden, in 3 years, 50% of the homes have sold. So we're looking at areas where generational change may happen, because that's sometimes where districts get surprised when they create attendance areas, assuming that these areas are like, they're static, when in fact, they could be on the verge of change. In fact, I know several areas in your school district where you've had some of these generational changes in the last 5 years. And some of you board members probably know too, especially if you live in one of those areas. And then we always ask the question of open enrollment. What are your targets and strategies? When it comes to, because that impacts how you create attendance areas. So what we're trying to suggest is that in this process, we're going to work with these variables with your team and be able to also bring this information and to help with the input team be able to bring this into the discussion. So that's not a mystery, and they understand the influence of these variables on ultimately what would be attendance areas. And I don't know if any of this is new for you, so we're going to take a pause and see if there's any questions.
Ms. Beloit?
Yeah, I was just wondering, where do you get the detail for the market share? I was really interested in the map that was in the information, and where are you getting that information from? Where's it pulled from?
Okay, this is pulled from an organization called Esri, so it's the community survey demographics provided on a national basis. We have that by age group, and so we have the data by age grouping organized into census blocks, so we can see the number of, just for our discussion's sake, 5 to 14-year-olds. And then we can look at the number of 5 to 14-year-olds in that census block that are enrolled in any school in White Bear Lake, and it creates a market share.
So it cross-references between, I mean, you can see where they're enrolled?
We don't see where they're enrolled, but we can see whether they're enrolled, whether they're attending one of your schools or not, unless the district has other information.
We know a total of an area of 5 to 14-year-olds, and we also know the total from that area that are coming to White Bear Lake
Right,
schools, so then we can calculate the market share of that.
So do you have the numbers for younger than 5?
Yes.
Yes.
So we also can look at the actual number. We can look at birth. We can look at the numbers in those areas by age, 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-olds, and we can also look at projections of where that's going in the next 5 years.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Dr. Newmaster?
I have a question from my own experience in White Bear Lake. I live on the edge of a boundary that has had the students moved from Parkview to Bel Air, back to Parkview, which turned into Metasca now. And anyway, and never moved in all that time. And one of the changes was because my daycare was in the Lincoln area, and I wrote down what year, in the spring of '86, the superintendent decided everyone had to attend from their household address. You did not have the choice of leaving from your daycare, even though if you've been going there for 10 years. That was a very unhappy spring for many of us. So I'm hoping that there's enough choice built in, so you don't just look at my home address, but you ask, where do your children depart from for school? Because a number of the kids in my neighborhood have other daycares within the district, and they don't attend our school because it's an IB school. So they go to another one. And it's so complicated what you're working on, but I hope you've thrown that bit of magic into it too, because it's important.
It's a great point, and it actually comes up not in every one of our engagements, but it does come up. especially if the district, as part of its procedures and enrollment practices, gives weight or openness to that daycare address. Another element that sometimes comes into play is you may have district procedures and policies with regards to staff with school-aged students, and that may so whatever your protocols and practices that are based upon what I would call enrollment preferences ends up getting put into the structure of the system. That's part of what we need to do this summer that we have not yet pulled into the system.
Okay, I just remember how painful that was.
It is, because you're right, if from a daycare, usually in the earlier grades, sometimes that's that's how parents operate, is by the daycare, not by the home address.
Right.
And you can probably tell that also with open enrollment. So there's usually what we call variables that are not demographic driven, they're driven by procedures of the district. And that's what differs from district to district to district.
Well, I hope White Bear has that as one of the options, and you gather that data.
Yeah, we currently have inter-district transfers, so
Right.
folks are able to choose.
Okay?
Thank
And
you.
also, by the way, here's another example which typically comes up is when you have a change in enrollment boundaries. Another issue that comes up sometimes is top grade of enrollment and sibling preference. There's another example that, wait a minute, if we change this, how does families and existing boundaries and the boundary changes, how does that impact certain families? So that's what I would call that's what the input team and design team work out, their recommendations about those procedures. Okay?
Thank you.
All right? So a guiding change document, as I said, this is just a picture of a framework, and it kind of talks about, it just gives you a visual image of why are you doing this, the current context and reality that you're in on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side of the document, I'll put up in just a minute, are some of the results. What are you trying to achieve? So when a design team and input team are working on attendance boundaries, the idea is to create attendance areas that in the end create and operate within the what, and they avoid the boundaries or the unacceptable means. And so what we did is, there's a document here, we're going to take some time and have you take a look at that. I know you've seen, but an initial draft as to why is the district doing it, what results might be asking options to be able to fulfill. In fact, many times when we're doing final presentations to the board on attendance area designs at the end of the process, you actually go through this document and you say, does this design meet that what? And you actually go through them one by one and rank them how well they meet the whats and how well they avoid the unacceptable means. Remember, in one district where they were doing this, about 45% of the elementary students were changing. And one of the unacceptable means was to see your current school on the bus going to the new school. And then it was a comma, even in the wintertime. And you go, well, come on. You know what? That was, they knew the community. And I will tell you that when the design was put up, we went and they said, we can show why we have been able to avoid this unacceptable mean. And it made sense to that community. So my hope is you've had a chance to look at this. We thought we would open up for a little bit of discussion, just any input or feedback that you as board members would have. This was our chance to kind of say to you, are there whys that you either have questions about or would see it that might be missing? Are there whats that you might have questions about or you think might be missing? So we thought we'd take just a moment for any feedback or input that you would have.
Feedback from anyone? Anybody have any comments or questions? No, I mean, with the expansion of the school, I think that there's a lot of it, we know that this is coming, and we know we're glad to see this process starting now, so that we can kind of work through it for the upcoming school year. So we're very pleased to see that as far as myself.
And I think it's the timing of doing this and being able to do the research and the modeling during the summer is going to be so much smoother, because sometimes we will get a call in September to start a process in October, and everything gets squished, where now there's time to think about it. So I think the timing is going to work out quite well in terms of being very prepared for October.
Perfect. Okay. Ms. Ellison?
Just a real quick clarification. So we're looking for implementation in the fall of '22. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And the hope is that you would be able to make decisions on design in November timeframe of '21, which gives you, we're trying to maximize the amount of time you have as a board and administration between decision and implementation.
Ms. Floyd?
So if one of the goals is 75% market share, what are we actually at right now overall?
So what we would be doing is two things. And I'll get to I can just go to the map. So here's an example of a market share map, K5. So what we would be, any census block that's currently above 75%, we just leave, go with those numbers. But any census block that's less, we would take a look at what would happen if those numbers were 75% or higher, how many additional students would that bring into each of the attendance area models? So that you're planning for the attendance area growth.
But we're also looking at the whys behind why we're not.
The whys behind, right.
So
And realize too, these census blocks don't all have the same number of kids. So you could have a census block that has 50 school-age children in it, and you could have another one next to it could have 5. So the percentages are not telling you the numbers. That's why we have to take a look at it and then look at strategies like, where are the students going now? What has the pattern been over several years? How has this changed, let's say, from 2017 to today? So there's a lot of work to do this summer to understand market share, but at this point, the document is saying the goal is to try to have a design that would set for the district about 75% market share.
Because I found it interesting that in several different areas, like Hugo and Anika, you got one area that's 100% within the same district as, you've got one little school that goes K through 2, and the other one is, 3 through 5, and it's only 65 and 64%.
Right.
And then Otter Lake, 90%, and then way down at the bottom, there's another 94% surrounded by, 50%. I find that
Well,
very
this is why I called this the unseen variable, because most people, they see housing growth, because I can see the stuff going up. Most districts are unaware of their market share, and if you're unaware, then you can't establish a strategy. So once you see the numbers, then what you frame, then you have to begin to understand why is it the way it is, right? And then what happens.
Do we have those whys yet, or are we still working on those?
Do we have why?
Do we have the whys yet, why that it is the
No.
way it is? That's just, okay.
No, we've just completed the development of the online system and aggregating all your new data. So the process really begins after this meeting and moving forward.
And I think it's really important too that when you're talking about market share, it's strategies. Because not a strategy in one part of the district may be the same that you would look at. Whereas if you look at an average district-wide market share and try to apply a strategy across the entire district, that may or may not be applicable in all areas.
Good.
Ms. Blaine?
Wayne, do you know if we've done this before as a district in previous years?
We've studied market share before leading up to the bond referendum. Yeah, and currently, I think we're at around, 69-70% is our market share right now overall, which is down a little bit.
But did that dig
due to
into
COVID.
the whys at the time?
We can, we have a pretty good idea of some of the whys, you know, like for example, with the COVID year, you know, some families chose to go to a private school as an example. That'd be one of the whys, why we saw a dip. But then when you narrow it down to a more granular level, like neighborhood, then there's a little bit more, obviously there's more work to do on those. But
And this data is 2020 or 2019?
these
This-
data are current.
Your current students this year.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Ellison?
When was the last time that White Bear did an attendance shift, boundary shift?
Tim would have the best chance of knowing that.
Yeah. It's been a long time.
Okay.
I think when we converted Matoska to a district-wide attendance, that shifted some boundaries for Willow. When Bel Air closed, that shifted some boundaries. But we really haven't done a
When
comprehensive.
was that, Tim? Was that like 15 years ago?
Yeah, that probably would have been around 2002, 2003.
Yeah.
So it makes sense with all that's going on right now in our district to look at this, because it's been a while. Also, I love this map. The market share map is so fascinating, and I'm really excited to see the more granular as we get more into this process. Yeah, that map, that's a great map.
And obviously, the real simple answer is we're building a school, and so therefore
Right.
we have to redraw boundaries. And in addition to that, it provides a lot of other benefit to go through this process, in addition to needing to because of the school.
Right. I was glad to see our equity protocol as one of the what's, because I think that's a
Right.
benefit too.
And it's the interpretation of that and how it applies to attendance boundaries will be a point of discussion for the public meetings.
Great,
Will
thank
this
you.
be done at a higher level too, above K-5?
We're looking at K-5 and middle.
Yeah, we have to look at middle schools too, because Sunrise moving, and then there's an imbalance right now between enrollment at Sunrise compared to enrollment at Central. So we have to balance those out as well. Yeah.
High school won't matter since it's going to
High
be
school
one,
won't
but
Yeah, that's the easiest one.
the middle school will matter big time.
But the implementation date isn't so critical at middle school. That could be,
Yeah, we have a little more
could be
time.
moved out a few years.
So if there isn't feedback or questions here, what I would encourage, because I think maybe by going through this as board members, you begin to understand, if you have questions or feedback or ideas, I would just feed them to Tim, and we can take a look at. We see the guiding change document as it's not a set in stone. It should reflect your understanding. So what happens many times is as we go through research and we start creating models, sometimes there's unacceptable means or what's that you begin to push up against. I'm not sure we can do this. One time we were working with the district and we were doing, it happened to be middle school design. And the design team came back to the superintendent and board and said, right now we can't come up with a design that avoids all of your unacceptable means. And so the question from the board was, well, what is it? Well, there was 3 of them that created this. You can't find your way through 3 unacceptable means. And the discussion led the board and the superintendent to modify the language. Well, when they modified the language and the interpretation, right, then all of a sudden the models began to flourish, but everybody in the community, everybody's on the same page. They understood they changed the document to provide guidance and parameters for the process. And I said it also has worked quite well in a sense of clarity and transparency to the public. If you have questions, here's why, here's what, and here's not how. As a board member, I don't have to think about it's on the website, and it will change reflecting the process in a public way.
Dr. Newmaster?
Got one more thing as I'm sitting here thinking about all the wonderful offerings. Our different elementary schools have different focuses. Sometimes it's a specialty because of IEPs, maybe they have an awesome autism spectrum offering or outdoor learning areas. And I know if you've got an IEP, you obviously get to go to the school that's the best meet, and you get transportation. But what if someone who is at one school really wants, and I know Mataska is its own special thing with IB and their transportation, but what about the equity for a child that wants to go to an outdoor nature school or another specialty? You know, that's adding things in, but we already have at least two reasons I know that kids can pick a specific school and program.
Right.
And get transportation. And I'm just wondering of the equity of it if someone else wants to be at the STEM school or the ecology school.
But typically in a process, I mean, what you're bringing up is the real, what happens in the meetings in the real work, and some of this you can accomplish through design of attendance areas. Part of what I think you've been speaking to is what has to go with the design is the procedures and protocols about enrollment, especially inter-district enrollment, that have to go with it, and that they have to work together. So you end up looking at both of those. It always comes up. And I don't know if I'm supposed to do something here in this.
Just trying to figure it out.
Well, first it said smart agent, and we looked at each other, is that you? We figured out it was neither one of us.
It isn't either of you. I'm afraid to click because I don't want it to update, but I'll try to just get it to, there you go.
Thank you.
Maybe solved for 9 minutes.
Okay, we'll be quick. I've never seen this employed, this strategy employed before, but we'll go with it. So the
Very passive aggressive way we do things.
Oh, I remember. Okay. In the decision-making model, what we're use this is to clarify roles, responsibilities, and sequence. And we haven't put the whole model of the process yet, but in the high level, choice makers are those who have accountability for the implications of the choice. And in attendance area, it's a superintendent and the board, from both a management and a governance. So what happens is that the choice makers are the ones that use the guiding change document to set the parameters for the circles up above that say options and stakeholder voice. In this process, what we've drafted with Wayne and Tim's assistance is to take a look at options and actually two different processes. One for the the elementary schools in the north, part of the district, mid to north, and separate that from the south. Because we believe the differences are enough between the communities and the schools that having two parallel processes will allow more focus and getting feedback that's more germane to the people who would come. So there's actually going to be one design team and two stakeholder voices. So the design team meets several times, but then it takes out information, the arrow going out to stakeholders. And the input teams provide an assessment and they brainstorm ideas that they think would improve the design. Comes back to the design team, they take it into account, they take another option out. You typically do this 2 to 3 times, so that the input team and the public see a changing design based upon the input from the stakeholders. And those are our public meetings. So the design team is organized around knowledge, and the stakeholders' voice are organized around representation. We've got protocols for setting those up. That has not been done. That will begin next fall when you come back. So it just allows you to say, there will be a design team creating options. There will be 2 different processes for parents and public and staff to join into. We will facilitate them differently, and Teamworks will be facilitating each of the public meetings. Okay? And supported by members of the design team. And typically this process our experience is it goes pretty well. There's always things that come up that you don't predict. And there's always ideas that come out from people that the design team just says, we never looked at it that way. And that's the beauty of that circular motion, that the arrows between the option team and the input teams. Eventually the option team will come to the superintendent and then to you as a board with, here's 1 or more options. One thing I will tell you as a board, You only bring forth options that will work with a guiding change document. You don't bring forth what we call straw dogs, just to have an option, but it really doesn't work. Only bring forward options that will meet the what's and to the best extent avoid the unacceptable means. Sometimes for some districts there only is one option. Sometimes there's two. Typically with input teams we work with two options. I'll just tell you that the reason, this is getting details, but I think as a board you should know. When you take out one option to the public, you are setting up the conditions that people are for or you set up dissonance within the community by having one option. When you set up two options, they can compare and contrast. And they can actually look at it through two different lenses and say, wait a minute, there's strengths and weaknesses of both of these. And many times by having two different options, designed in two different ways, they kind of combine. And it usually works pretty well. So that's the decision-making model. And we provided this as an example, as you can see. This is just one example, because we assume that you may not, if you haven't done market share, you might, what does that mean? And we have this developed for each of the levels. And then what we would do as part of the end product is bring back to you not only what is the design, but what's the impact of the design. All right? So any discussion and other feedback?
Are there questions, comments? Okay. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. I hope you can do your software updating now.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
We're good. We will move into our next discussion item, which is B2, the school start and dismissal time adjustment for 21-22. Dr. Kazmierczak.
All right, thank you. We'll see if I... All right, thanks. Okay. All right, thank you. Thanks again, Ray. And thanks, Dennis. All right, school start and dismissal time adjustment. So tonight I just wanted to go through, much of this is a review, and I think the meat of the content is probably just to talk through some of the questions that have come up, and then we'll just go through the answers to those questions. And some of the slides are kind of wordy, but we crafted the presentation to look like essentially we're taking this and converting it and making it available on the website so we have questions and answers, and but we're going to walk through that tonight. And then we have other folks here tonight to help answer questions should they arise from you board members. So I'm going to jump in. Some of this I'll move through relatively quickly because it's an overview from what we talked about before. So key factors that went into the recommendation is that first it aligns with our strategic plan. And this has been, I've been in the district about 7 years, and this idea has been talked about ever since I arrived. And it did become part of our strategic work through our strategic planning process. We won't go through all of this, it'll come up in a little while, but the proposed change aligns with the research on adolescent sleep, and we've added a little bit more to, when we've answered some of the questions, we've added a little bit more from what you've seen up to this point. We made a commitment to the city of White Bear Lake and the neighborhood here, the North Campus and Central neighborhood, that we would try to mitigate the impact of the combined high school. And we did an extensive study on traffic, in part because we wanted to know what we were dealing with, but also we needed to do that so that we could better design a high school project that would fit within the community. And we know from that study that an 8:30 a.m. start at the high school is going to be necessary in order for us to avoid creating major traffic issues in downtown White Bear Lake. And so we've made that commitment going into the bond referendum process with the city, and that's what we know to be the time that would work, taking that into account. And then, fortunately, so we're a district that if we were to make this change, we actually are going to see a significant savings in operating costs, and not every district is able to realize savings when they go through this process. Some districts, it ends up being a cost-neutral endeavor. Some districts end up spending more, but we're in the situation where we're actually going to be able to reduce our expenses, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. So some of the questions and answers, some of the most common ones that we've been fielding. First of all, here's the time again, the proposed times. I know preschool was added to this graphic, so those so the full day preschool would match the elementary times. And again, I just went through these items. And so a question about how will it affect elementary students? One of the questions that's come up is, well, aren't we just shifting the issue to younger students then, the lack of sleep? And the answer to that really is younger students are, they have biology on their side. They're able to adjust their sleep patterns, whereas adolescents are not. And that's just, that's a simple fact. And so younger children aren't able to modify bedtimes, and they're able to wake up earlier, and whereas with adolescents, that's not so easy to do, just because of what their bodies are going through. Let's see, some of these, I'm citing various studies, but unlike teens, elementary age children are capable of falling asleep earlier in the evening and can wake earlier as well with no ill effects. The morning time is the prime morning instructional time, so we'd actually be capitalizing on that with our elementary students. There was a question about, well, is there evidence that there's a negative impact on moving start times earlier for elementary students? Is there negative academic outcomes? And the answer is no, we haven't found that. We haven't found that there's any negative impact in having elementary students start earlier. Let's see what else. Just a couple other things. Earlier start times allow for more productive and energetic learning in the afternoon as well as the morning, and some other advantages perhaps to this to an earlier start time is that students would be able to take advantage of more outdoor play time at the end of the day. Elementary activities will be relatively unaffected. So most rec practices are at 5:30 or later. I know Mr. Mauer connected with some of our youth associations, and he didn't think this would be a significant burden upon their programming. And then middle and high school students, again, I don't necessarily want to read through all of this, but I think some of it bears mentioning again, just the academic outcomes of the later start, significantly improved grades, reduced tardiness, reduced absenteeism, improved graduation rates. Where low graduation rates were an issue, this helped to improve it. Social, emotional, and other outcomes include statistically significant less reported depression, fewer discipline incidents, fewer emotional outbursts, reduced risky behavior, and fewer car accidents. Middle school activities, again, apologize for the wordiness of this, but the first bullet, I have this on both the middle school and the high school activities question. So this particular research piece looked at a lot of, I wouldn't say it was a meta-analysis, but it looked at a lot of different scenarios and school districts that made the change. And in their study, they found no district in which athletic programs were canceled or significantly adversely affected by school start time change. And in many cases, districts found that more students participated in athletics and that sports programs grew after that. And in some cases, teams performed better because the athletes were getting more rest. So we currently offer some middle school activities before school. We will continue that. The 9:15 start time would allow us to do that with relative ease. So some of that would still happen. We would still have after-school clubs and activities and enrichment. There would be activity buses available. Practices would run approximately from 4:15 to 5:45. Again, some of these details we'll work out as we get closer to fall. And we know that we'd have instances where athletes would need to be let out in order to get to competitions, and that would be one of the factors that we would have to deal with. We currently have that issue, and while we anticipate that increasing, we don't anticipate a sizable increase, but it will happen. There's no doubt. With high school activities, same point at the beginning. We typically run 2 practice sessions. This practice will continue. I think it's important to note here as well that, so our athletic facilities improvements and additions, they're going to be coming online here in the next couple of years. So, for example, in the fall of 21, the gymnasium addition at South Campus will be completed. So that will give us more space in order to conduct practices. And then the new field house and then an additional turf field will be completed in the fall, winter of 2022. That work is set to begin yet this summer, and so we're going to see improvements coming online relatively quickly once things get underway. And we do know that lower level contests, JV contests, we see those starting at 4 and 4:30, so there may be times when we have students needing to get out of school early to get to those. This question, how early will students be waiting at a bus stop? So 7:10 will be our target. Now we're not, that's our target. We may not be able to adhere to that strictly, but that's what we hope to do. So that would be the earliest pickup time for any student who's riding a school district bus. We tried to push that as late as we could, and this is as far as we can push it right now. And of course, the question is, darkness at a bus stop, and really it's the middle of December, late December, early January into the middle of January where that becomes an issue. But as always, if we encourage families to be out with students at bus stops if there is any concern about safety. But this is as late as we can push it with a 7:45 elementary start time. Just as a point of reference, in our current schedule, we have high school students that are being picked up as early as 6:30 or 6:35. So just as a point of reference. Question about why is Matoska schedule different? And that one's easy to answer because Matoska is the boundary for Matoska is the entire district. And it's not like the smaller neighborhood boundaries like the other elementary schools where you might have a total time of 20 minutes where students are actually riding the bus, where they get on the most a kid might be on a bus at Lincoln, for example, might be from 7:10 to 7:30. That would be 25 minutes. For a student on the northern part of the district to get on a bus that gives them a ride to Matoska, they might be on the bus for 50 to 60 minutes. So in that case, those students would need to be on the bus at 6:30 or between 6:30 and 6:45. So that pushes that way too early. So that's why Matoska isn't recommended to be a 7:45 start. The bus rides are longer for students at Matoska. Budgetary impact, I've touched on this. We're under this scenario, we would actually be able to use 7 fewer buses, and that translates into approximately $600,000 in savings. And a question about could we figure it out so that every school could start at 8? And the answer is yes, we could, but essentially what we would do is every single school would shift then. So if we shift 15 minutes, then everything else would shift 15 minutes as well. So then middle school would move to 9:30 instead of 9:15, for example. The end times would push even later. So we're not recommending that. But the question is, could we do 8 or later? It's just not going to be able to work. I will say this with, and I question if I should even say this, but once we get into the school year, there might be an opportunity to tweak the times a few minutes here and there, and if we were able to do that, we would. We would love to be able to maybe push the 7:45 start time to 7:50 if we could. I just don't think we can promise that right now because we're Mike Torito has developed a scenario that, there's not a lot of margin for error in terms of the amount of time it's going to take us to run each tier, and I would hate to do something that would throw that off. But if in a year from now we realize, yeah, we could actually, we could maybe make some minor shifts, then we would certainly consider that. Before and after school options will be available, so at our elementaries, so the extended day would open up at 6:30 in the morning, and then there'd be 2 different dismissal options in the afternoon. Students could stay till 4:30 or until 6. There's a variety of contract options available. Continue to offer our financial assistance for families, and then the long-term county fee assistance is still available. And then there would be an opportunity to offer additional after-school enrichment classes as well. Question came up about what other districts have done this. So I've created a list of these are the districts I could find in some of the research articles. Question came up earlier about Mahtomedi. That was back in 2002. The change wasn't as drastic as well. It was shifting the high school time, I think 20 or 30 minutes at the time. But they showed up in some of the research articles. Edina and Minneapolis were back in the mid to late 90s. And you've all seen some of the writings from Dr. Wallstrom. Dr. Kyla Wallstrom is still very active and very involved in this work and providing guidance for school districts. And so she's been wonderful. She's been very accessible the last few weeks as we've contemplated this change. And there's quite a list of professional organizations that have endorsed later school start times for middle and high school students. I won't go through the list, but it's a pretty exhaustive list. Pretty credible organizations. Question about why now? Why don't we wait until the fall of '24? And the simple answer is, if we are going to prioritize student health and well-being, there was no reason to wait for this decision. So waiting only delays the benefits that students would receive from this change. Timeline, again, unless you tell me differently, but the plan right now is to come to you on April 12th with the recommendation that you would then be asked to act upon, and we would implement in the fall. There's a lot of work that needs to do, certainly amongst families and planning, and also internally we have planning to do as well. We have our extended day contracts need to be processed, and transportation obviously needs to refine and do more work there. Food service needs to do planning with staff. So there's a lot of work to do once the decision is made. So we would appreciate knowing that which direction we're headed in April. I included the links to some of the references here in this particular presentation, but there are a lot more resources than this for sure. And then we have launched a web page, so I think it's live now. Marissa, am I right? Essentially, it has a lot of the questions that we just went through and the answers. Those are all up on the website right now. And we're going to have a informational session next Tuesday at 6:30 in the district auditorium here. We have at least one guest who will be in talking about the importance of or a summary of the adolescent sleep research. One of the people who've worked with Dr. Wallstrom at the U of M. Dr. Wallstrom would have been here, but she's going to be on vacation and won't be able to present that night. And we're trying to line up a pediatrician as well. In addition, I'll go through a similar presentation as what I've done right here, and then we'll have attendees will have an opportunity to ask questions as well. Okay, so that's my presentation tonight. As I said, we've got other people here who might be able to answer some questions if I'm not able to. So happy to take any questions you have.
Questions? Dr. Newmaster.
got lots of data on buses, since my kids were walkers to Lincoln Elementary. I'm wondering about young kids walking, and I know there was some discussion, and I think something in print about the distances might be farther, because we're looking at money and how much it costs, who gets a bus ride and who doesn't. But I'm thinking of walking in the dark at, before 7, 6 blocks, 8 blocks, a mile. That's questionable, because that's before the streets and sidewalks get cleared. Kids are walking on the streets sometimes. So I'm just wondering, what percent of the kids are taking the bus to different schools? And what percent of each kids, if it's a neighborhood school, not a Mataska, but a neighborhood school, what percent of the kids are actually walking to school? And your principals probably know that.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but I certainly can get it. I don't know if any principal has anything to offer.
You can have your patrols out in the dark, and how many little
I
kids
think
walking?
I don't want to overstate that kids are going to be in the dark, like the entire school year, and there's a narrow window of time.
No, it's just December, January.
There's a narrow window of time in the winter when it's dark out.
Right.
It's dark in the winter, and we're in
Right.
Minnesota. And I don't want to minimize that, but I also think, again, we're trying to push it as late as we can to
Right.
fit within the recommendation. And we can't push it any later right now than 7:45 unless everything else changes.
Well, my question was really focused on, is there an extended distance for walking?
The walking distances are not changing. Mike Torito isn't here tonight, so.
Okay.
But I'll verify that, but we aren't expanding the walking distances along with this change.
Okay, well, there was some talk at one point that
We-
kids of different ages might
we-
walk farther than they
We
have
changed
been.
the walking distances this year because we needed to lessen the number of students on buses due to
Right, so I
COVID.
wondered if the change
So
was
we'll revert
carrying.
back to what we had been.
Okay,
Yep.
It's not a
Thank
half
you.
mile. At least it was
Yeah.
previously a
Yeah.
half mile.
Yep.
Okay. Sellison?
I have a couple of clarifying questions. The $600,000 budget savings, I thought I saw in the presentation that that's annual.
It's annual savings.
So that's not a one-time savings.
No, it would reduce our operating costs because of those 7 buses would not be used, and that would be an ongoing savings.
Okay?
And given that, we just had the boundary discussion, so we're adding an elementary school, and so, we'll have to look at the impact of that additional school as well, and so that might actually increase costs down the road. And so anything we can do now to help mitigate the impact of that will be helpful as well.
Then, as we're talking about that discussion, and as it relates to Matoska, so if Matoska stays at 8:30, and then we do boundary shifts where Matoska now includes full district and local, it would still remain at 8:30. Is that right?
I don't know if we could commit to.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of,
I would think what we change it to will not change significantly going forward because of the boundary study. There might be some tweaks, but the big flip would where we're flipping elementary to the earlier tier, that would remain. Could Matoska's time change a little bit in a year or two? Absolutely, it could. I don't know for sure. I think that's getting ahead of the boundary process, and I just think that's getting ahead of the process that we're just embarking upon with boundaries.
sure, it's a lot coming.
Yep.
And so I'm just trying to think about,
Yep.
we are looking at some significant changes
Yep.
here for the district.
I don't anticipate that the start times would change all that much, in a year from now, unless there were some minor tweaks we needed to make.
Okay.
But I don't want to commit that we're 8:30 Matoska from here on out forever will be. No, we can't say that.
Okay. And then my last question is, as I'm thinking about after-school care for our elementary kids, There was one year where I had all 4 of my kids in elementary school. And there's no way that we could have afforded to pay for after-school care. We don't qualify for free and reduced lunch. We're in that weird middle zone. And so I want to ensure that whatever the options are, the flexible options, that we consider that for our elementary families. You know, my kids are older now, but I think about that, and that would have made me really nervous as an elementary parent. So I just want to make sure that's in the front of our minds.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Chapman?
Student athletes, the way it sounds, there will be occasions a little more frequently where they'll need to be released earlier. And just wondering in terms of, from the staffing standpoint, you know, the coaches obviously would need to be, I would think, released earlier too. You know, that would happen more than it's been happening. How do we handle that as far as coverage for a particular class when staff needs to vacate to, you know, get to practice or games or whatever?
Brian? Yeah. Here, yeah. Brian, do you want to talk at all about that, or one of the principals?
Where do you want me, sir? Got it.
Please come forward.
Absolutely. I can't necessarily speak to the coverage from an academic teacher standpoint. Obviously, that's something that I'll have to work with the middle school principal specifically. But yes, there will be a slight increase in the number of times that students will need to be out of class at the end of the school day getting ready for competitions. Most of them are our lower level, as Dr. K had said. Most of our lower, and when I say lower, it will be our 9th and 10th grade competitions, to be completely transparent. And those competitions within our conference right now start at 4:30. And we can make it work to still end our school day with the new start times and not have those kids miss classes to 80% of our away contests. The 2 main ones that we will struggle to get to on time for those will be East Ridge and Park in Cottage Grove. Outside of that, with a 4:30 start, we would have no issue having our kids get out of school at a normal time. It will be tight. They'll have to get ready and not have a lot of time for social time after school before they have to get dressed for their competition and head out. But there will be a couple of times in which they will need to leave early on a consistent basis for that.
Right. What about coaches?
For coaches,
In terms of coaches, how, and maybe it's more appropriately addressed by a principal. I'm just wondering how the coverage
enjoy the party.
occurs in a situation like that, how the class or classes that students left behind that aren't the athletes, how are they going to be, are those situations going to be addressed?
Sure, absolutely. So Christina Pierre, principal at Sunrise. And so when we know a person is a coach, a teacher, one thing that we can do is try to give them the last prep of the day. So we try to schedule them so that they don't have a class as the last slot of the day. So that's one way that we can avoid that. And then the other thing that we do is then we'll just schedule a sub to cover that class. And so most often that'll be a teacher who's already working in the building that has that time open, who's willing to make a little bit extra money and cover that class so that coach can go.
That's fairly common to get a teacher that, I mean, we're not looking at a sub for a large part of the day if it's just
Right.
like one class.
Sure.
We often can pull somebody in for that hour or whatever. Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
But our middle school coaches will have a 6-hour prep, and so that'll get them out of school roughly 3 o'clock or shortly thereafter. So they'll have a kind of an hour built in to allow that time, transportation time. And they'll be done before the high school students.
And I will say, just to kind of also reiterate something similar along what Dr. K had said, is we currently have in our conference, Mounds View schools, South Washington schools, and Cretin-Derham Hall all have a similar start and end time to what we are currently going to. And in speaking with those activities administrators, there was some more creativity and there were some more kids that were missing classes than prior to the change. But overall, it hasn't been a negative transition, and they've found ways to make it work, both from student standpoint and our coaches and advisor standpoint.
Thank you.
Ms. Beloit?
I just had a couple questions about on the north end, because you've got 61 coming down, and without knowing where the boundaries are, obviously, it makes the walkability on the east side pretty difficult, because the only crossing is about a half a mile south, which is,
Are you talking of the new elementary school?
yeah, with the new elementary, because it's right off of
We're
61.
building, there'll be a stoplight right at the school.
There's going to be one there.
There is going to be a
Oh,
stoplight
okay.
at the school.
That'll make,
Yep.
because there's a whole path on the
Yep.
west side,
Yep.
but nothing on the east side, so trying to get there, they'd have to shift down and walk a half mile back north if you're on the east side. West side, you've got a whole neighborhood you could walk through,
Yeah.
but you
So
do have the
Part of the
wetlands
planning,
behind
part of
too.
the plan for the new elementary was, we had this debate between another roundabout or a light, and we landed up landing on a stoplight there at that spot.
We
Lord, please
explored
don't go around
159th Street, 152nd Street, had a public meeting up in Hugo for the neighbors of that to talk through how we'd access that site.
Does the land completely, it butts up to that neighborhood on the west side, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Good?
Good.
Other questions, comments? Ms. Thompson?
I guess mine kind of hits off of a little bit of what Jessica already said, and one of the big concerns I know that we're going to have in our community has to do with our younger kids getting home before their siblings that used to be home to help mom and dad take care of them at the end of the school day. And that is going to be probably one of our biggest push. I'm a fan of the proposal. I've talked about this for years. I think our older students, definitely the research is there that shows that they will benefit from this. And our younger kids do tend to, when my kids were little, they were up at the crack of dawn, ready to go. They're not up at the crack of dawn anymore. And it doesn't matter what time they go to bed. But it will be an issue for many of our families, because I was one of those families too, like Jessica, who we didn't qualify. We were just at the point where we didn't make it. And so, we paid for the daycare as much as we could. We cut everything wherever we could. But I only had to put one kid in the program. I can't imagine if I had to put multiple kids in the program. So I guess my question would be, is this something that we're going to consider in adjusting our extended day rates? Can we do that? Because the poverty levels that are set on the federal level they're just not, they're not up to speed with today's times and the cost of living. So that is a big concern for me, is how, we don't want any of our little kids left at home alone because their parents can't afford to put them in extended day and they don't qualify to meet the guidance to get some help on that. So is this something we're considering? Can we consider it? I mean, I'm sure we probably can't, because I know with budget, but.
Yeah, well, I think, and maybe Tim can speak to it a little bit, but so the extended day program that we offered, that needs to sustain itself. That's not that's a fee-based program. It's a child care program that we're offering. We think it's a great option. It's a high-quality option. We put it up against any other daycare option in the community. We think it's wonderful. But we also need to be able to financially make that work. And so the key will be finding, how do we provide a tiered tuition model for that program that still allows it to run afloat, because we can't be subsidizing our daycare with general fund dollars, for example. So that's the question. That's a great question, and we know that's one of the that's one of the challenges with the time change. And I don't know, Tim, if you have anything to add?
Yeah, we just have a few things. We know that that's going to be probably one of our biggest challenges for our families. And what we're doing, and what my team's already busy working on with the extended day leadership team, is having those discussions internally about what do we need to create that well-rounded, robust program for our students to participate in and make it as affordable as possible. And that doesn't have to necessarily just be an extended day too. So when we look at contract options with those dual dismissal times, we can have a lower rated contract with the 4:30 dismissal for families that don't need to be there until 6. And of course, have that 6 o'clock option like we've had in the past will be one. Number of days per week as an option too. If families may not need, care 5 days a week, maybe it's 3 or 4 days. And then maybe, what we're also looking towards is what can we do on the enrichment side. So maybe it's not really, maybe you don't really extend the day for that time, but maybe just being in this enrichment course for this few weeks for an hour and a half after school will be perfect for your family's needs too. And those are all going to be options that we'll explore and put out to the community.
That's great.
And as far as our rates go, I don't have those set yet.
No, and the program is fabulous. One
Yeah.
of my kids went through it, and I loved the extended day program. I just know if I had one more child that needed to be in it, I would have had to figure something else out.
Yeah, yep, and it's, we, like the Wayne's Point, it's a financially based, tuition-based program, so we need to make sure that we're covering our costs to run the program sufficiently, but, we've done a really nice job, and we'll continue to do a nice job of making sure that they are as affordable as possible, and we do take into consideration that there are other options in the community as well, but, we do pride ourselves on being an educational-based childcare option that's affordable for families, and we're very competitive, either right close to our neighbors, are usually a little bit below rates, and that's not true for everything, but we've usually, when we've reviewed them in the past, we've been right in the middle of the pack.
Yep. Well, and it's one less place the kids have to go, so they go to school and then they stay there, so it's not as, That really is my, I guess, biggest concern is just that issue.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Thompson. I'm going to go to Dr. Arcan first. Dr. Arcan?
Yeah, the only question I have is we have a list here of schools who've made this transition. And maybe we don't want to recreate the wheel. Have we asked them how they transitioned when they did this for the daycare, and maybe they have some ideas that we can look at?
Yeah, I haven't, the whole list that Dr. Kazmierczak provided, I haven't talked with anybody, but I have had conversations with my counterparts in other districts that have made the shift, and we're moving forward with a lot of what they decided to do too, kind of a tier dismissal time at the end of the day, or different contract options for that, as well as making sure that we do have morning care available, even though it's earlier, or school starts earlier, but making sure that that's an option for families as well too. So, yeah, we're definitely learning from other districts that have done this and taking their advice to heart.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Arcan. Mr. Chapman?
Yeah, I read along with Ms. Ellison and Ms. Thompson. I guess I do share that concern relative to the small kids that traditionally or historically have been relying on the older siblings to take care of them. A question I've got, now as far as I believe one of the slides that Dr. Kazmierczak mentioned that was put up here alluded to Ramsey County long-term assistance. Do they go according to the federal, do we know if they go according to the federal poverty guidelines? Do they deviate at all? I'm just wondering if, if there is any opportunity for some assistance there that may, be available.
The county assistance?
Yes, yeah.
Yep, so to be eligible for that, you do have to meet the DHS guidelines, which we do, and we have that go through we've shifted our system to follow those DHS guidelines to be permissible for families to receive county assistance. So if we have a family that qualifies for that, what we do is kind of aid them in that process when working with the county and getting set up for that. So I don't know if I can answer your question right now, Dr. or Mr. Chapman, around the federal guidelines or, income, what their guidelines are, but we definitely, once we work with our families, we'll connect them with the county agencies and then work with them to work through that process.
Might be worthwhile to check out just to see if the county is deviating at all from those federal guidelines or not, because if they are, and people are more eligible than what they would be, following strict federal guidelines, that would be something I'm sure we'd want to, have out there to our families, so if this were to go through. Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Ms. Thompson?
Just a quick comment. There's, I believe, 2 states for sure in our country who have mandated statewide that no middle school or high school is allowed to start before 8:30 due to all the research. So I think this is going to just keep moving throughout the country. That's just my added little, the science is there.
Okay, thank you very much. So what it sounds like, Dr. Kazarchuk, is that will come before the board at the next regular board meeting on the 12th?
Yep, that's the plan, yep.
Okay, thank you all very much. We'll now move to our next discussion item, B3, which is the Elementary Distant Learning Academy application. Is that Dr. Gillespie?
Dr. Gillespie was unable to be here tonight, so she has a very able and high-quality help.
Replacement?
So Dr. Gillespie sends her regrets. She just wasn't able to be here tonight, and she apologizes for that, but it was something out of her control, so.
All right. Well, thank you. Jen Babish, Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and thank you, Chair Mullen, members of the board, Dr. Kazmarchuk. Tonight, I have my colleagues that helped work on our Distance Learning Academy application, and so we're bringing it as a discussion item first. And really, this application is for a K-5 comprehensive online learning provider for the school year for upcoming school year 2021-2022. As you are aware, we currently have a Distance Learning Academy because of the executive order from the governor, and so we didn't need to go through an application process. However, if we want to continue to provide online learning as a platform for our families, we have to apply to the state. And so I have my colleagues here. Amber Walsh is the interim principal of the Distance Learning Academy, and I have Dr. Melinda Fierro, who is our research assessment coordinator, and I also have our assistant director of technology and innovation, Sarah Florin. And we really worked as a team to work through this application, and so tonight we will share the highlights and hopefully be able to answer any questions that you may have.
All right, so I'm going to share a little bit about what our dreams or our hopes would be for this programming, and this is very exciting work for me. In the spring, I was at Central and watching all of the distance learning happening and knowing how we were all feeling at that time, my other thought was, we can't lose all of this. There are lessons to be learned, and we are moving education so rapidly. So what can we take from this, and how can we change? And so something that we're looking at is just creating that personalized learning model for our students at the Distance Learning Academy. How do we have them leaders of their own learning and understanding what their own goals are and what they're working toward? We'd like to engage them more collaboratively, both with their students and with their teachers. And this has been one of the greatest lessons I'm learning as I'm talking to my teaching staff right now, that they feel that they are more connected with their students. It's a different connection, but they're more connected by being one-on-one and with small groups with them a lot more. We want to be able to create project-based programming that really is reflective of what students want to learn and need to learn, and is supported by our White Bear Lake area staff.
So as you know, and you can see, our Distance Learning Academy does align with our strategic plan. And I just want to highlight two of our strategies, and you can see how I've highlighted the connections. But the first one I want to highlight is that very first one. Each student is a primary agent in their learning. As we think about the curricula for the Distance Learning Academy for next year, we really want to provide some self-paced curricula to provide students and families with some flexibility and personalization. And we know students learn at different rates, and so the self-paced or asynchronous piece of our learning model will really help provide that, and then allowing the teacher to kind of help guide that self-paced learning with check-ins, individual check-ins, or small group check-ins. And then also with our model, we really are going to continue the instructional model of the gradual release of responsibility. And so as you think back to the learning models that we've gone through this year, thinking about the I do, which is the teacher, the we do together, and then that gradual release of independent learning where the student would do that themselves. And so with this model, we'll still be able to continue that instructional design. And then the other strategy I really want to hone in on is the third to the last one, engage families as partners. And what we're finding with all of our research is this really is a partnership with families and caregivers. We know our primary kids are not going to be able to learn on their own at home independently. We're really going to need to partner with caregivers to help with that learning. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like, but we really see this as a great opportunity. And I know Amber had mentioned that her teachers are really feeling the connection with families this year as well. So I was on the phone this morning with MDE and just checking in on our application, making sure we're on the right track. And really the things that MDE is looking for is we're providing all of the services that we would provide to our in-person learners, to our online learners. And so with this application, we would comply with all of our federal, state, local policies, you know, looking at our own district policies and school board policies, really aligning, you know, financially, looking at hiring with HR, with the technology, with student privacy, all those things, also with special education and ensuring our students who have IEPs, their IEPs would be met with our online learning platform, and then also that we're aligning all of our curricula to the Minnesota state standards. And so MD is very specific on making sure we show that we're able to comply with all of those policies that we have from the federal, state, and at the district level.
So I see this year as giving us building blocks as we're moving forward with this. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what the day looks like right now for students. And these are the places that have been very successful, but I know we can build on and improve. So right now we run our school day very typical to the other buildings, 9 a.m. to 2:40. When we started this, our focus was social emotional learning, literacy, math, writing, and then building in our science and social studies as interdisciplinary or part of the other pieces of the day. We use both synchronous and asynchronous time, and I will talk a little bit more about that. And then we do provide a variety of different instruction, and this is really based on the age level of the students. We are finding that our kindergarten and first grade students do perform a lot better when they are in very small groups or conferring with a teacher. Second and third grade students, more whole group time has been effective, but that small group time is still really important. And then as we're moving into fourth and fifth grade, they can do more whole group or more half class type instruction, and we reserve that one-on-one really for office hours or specific needs. Our students do have specialists that is provided by White Bear Lake area teachers from other buildings. They receive 2 synchronous or teacher is teaching them live in that class per week and 1 asynchronous. And then we have intervention services, EL services, and special education support coming from the buildings to support our students throughout the day. So I want to explain a little bit the synchronous instruction. All of our kindergarten and first grade students receive 60 minutes per day. That means that my teachers are online far more than that with their students, but in order to meet those small group needs or those conferring needs, we find that's what really works best. Our second and third grade, We started out with a minimum of 90 minutes per day per child. I'm going to tell you they are far exceeding that right now with the amount of time the students are on, but that was our minimum time for instruction, mix of whole group and small group. And then our 4th and 5th grade students are on for at least 2 hours per day. Commonly, that's much more than 2 hours per day. I've got my older students doing a lot of mixing now. My 4th grade teams have started to have kids working on math with different teachers in order to best meet their needs, and have really started to get creative as we move into spring on how they can blend in more project work time, so that when the students are working asynchronously, that they're working on things that are really important and meaningful to them. And it's been a lot of fun to start those conversations and that planning, and knowing that will be in place in the closing months to our school year.
So what does support look like in the Distance Learning Academy? It looks very similar to our in-person supports that we have. And one visual I just wanted to provide is that three-legged stool, again, that I talked about with our strategic plan and engaging and partnering with families, that this it's going to take a village for our Distance Learning Academy students, as well as we think about individual needs and our multilingual learners, students who may have IEPs. We also will be addressing social emotional learning needs with a curricula for social emotional learning, and obviously the academics with literacy, math, social studies, and science, and then our specialists. And so one of the things that we're really wanting to make sure is when we survey families to see who would be interested in this, that we are really being upfront with the expectation of what this partnership looks like, so that we want our families to be successful. And this was something that we really grappled with our team, and that I talked with MDE about today too, is so we think about our equity decision-making, four-way equity decision-making model, and really providing access so all families have this opportunity if this is what they would choose in the fall. And one of the things that was really important was the onboarding piece and the partnering with families before this starts in the fall, to ensure that if we needed to do some online training, in-person training with our families on the platform, for them to really feel comfortable navigating that online platform with their child, that would be something. Also looking at if we, working with our cultural liaisons and our folks that have relationships with our families already, if it's school psychologist or social worker, to really ensure that they're feeling the support right up front, so that they have what they need before we begin the school year. So that's something we're really taking into consideration and being purposeful about as we move in. So before we open it up for questions, just a timeline. We are bringing this back tonight again for an operational item for approval, and then we would be surveying our families next to see who would be interested in this model for next year, and then submitting our application to MDE. Right now, MDE is saying it's about a 3-month process out, and working with them back and forth, but all who have applied for the application have been approved, as long as they're willing to work with each other. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Babish. Questions? Sellison.
I have a couple of questions. What do you sense could be the capacity for the Distance Learning Academy?
Yep, great question. So part of what we had to do in the application was to provide a budget. And so what we've done is, working with finance, we've projected 2 sections per grade level. And so that would be around half the students we have now, so around 300 students, K-5. And so that was kind of our preliminary projection of what we were working with to think about what resources would be needed, what FTE allocations, all those things. But we really don't know, and so we're giving it our best guess as to right now, and then knowing that, there may be folks that say, yes, we want to do this, and then 3 months from now, they change their mind too. So there's still a lot of unknown, but that's what we're projecting.
And so when you say FTE allocations, are you thinking that these would need to be new hires, Or would it be teachers who are already working in the district, such as the model you're using now?
Yep. You know, and we believe we're going to be using the same current model that we have right now. So the sooner we know the enrollment, that would help us then. So, yep, it would be taking our current FTEs. It wouldn't be new hires.
So I have started surveying my staff a little bit just to see who would be interested if this was a possibility. I've gotten responses from about 2/3 right now, and about half of them say this is something they would generally be interested in, and that's very important to me to make sure if this moves forward, we have people that are truly interested in sustainable programming.
And so that would affect then the classes at other elementary schools depending on the number of students per grade that chose. And then as far as the specialists and the IEP supports, will those still be coming from other elementaries, or will they be someone who is assigned to the Distance Learning Academy?
Yep, that's conversations I've had with Ms. Warren as well, and we're hoping to, you know, the more we know, the sooner we know, I think the better. And so we don't have a definitive answer for that, but you know, we're taking what we're learning this year, I think, and trying to do things similarly as much as possible, especially with the IEP support and things like that as well.
And I just have one more question. So would we look at this then as sort of our 10th elementary school, right? So when we're thinking about you know, how all of our elementary schools have community and they feel like a family and they have their own focus, would the Distance Learning Academy then, would we strive to give those students and educators the same sort of feel?
Yeah, definitely. I've really tried in this virtual environment that we're in to add in things like a monthly theme. I focus a lot on kindness and connections with my staff. That's how I communicate with my family community and my staff, with my connections and announcements. So that's been a very big thing. I created a family advisory panel where parents volunteer to come in and talk with me. I have a student advisory lunch bunch tomorrow, so I'm really trying to do those things as much as possible. I think the idea that the world will be a different place a year from now and I can be able to have students come in and confer or get IEP meetings in person, I think there are pieces that will naturally be able to happen that are very exciting.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Arcan?
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions. I was just curious what kind of strategy you have in place for a student who's struggling to be successful in distance learning.
Yep. You know, as you know, Dr. Arcan, we've really been working on our multi-tiered system of support this year and looking at core instruction and how we provide if students are, you know, reaching their grade level with reading or math, and with social emotional learning. And so we see those supports being able for us to have at the Distance Learning Academy as well. And that was something, I also talked with MDE today about how it's not so much about the process you put in place, but how are we gathering that information and data if students are struggling. And so one of the strategies is really looking at, in our curricula, for example, when we do our social emotional learning units, you know, taking that formative assessment. Maybe we're hearing of, you know, a caregiver who's fallen ill, or, you know, just kind of in our informal kind of assessing of how the child is doing. We can take that information then and be able, you know, if it's a social worker or school psych, to be able to intervene early. And so that was really, I think, a good advice piece that they gave to me today, is to really look at how you're going to gather that data. We absolutely have that structure in place like we do in person, but how are we ensuring that we're, you know, once we're hearing things informally, that we're able to follow up?
Thank you. My last question is, where do I go if I'm a fifth grader and I'm done? Because are we planning then on making this a middle school academy and then a high school academy for those that want to continue on?
That's a great question, and I will be back with a partial application for our secondary, which we're looking to do more of a course-by-course basis for both our middle school and high school. So working with a middle school team and a high school team on that next. So yes,
Thank you. Ms. Floyd?
So have we done a cost comparison between this model and our regular model? So distance versus just the regular in-school model?
So the way that we allocated the budget would be to really just take the allocations that we have for our in-person buildings and allocate the same resources to the Distance Learning Academy. So the controllable budgets, which would be for supply type purchases, the staffing, all of that is the same model.
But it doesn't necessarily cost the same.
Not necessarily.
So that's what I'm trying to dive into a little bit here, because we know that this is going to cost more because during COVID, having to switch and have more teachers to balance both of these things. So what I'm trying to figure out is, do we know how much more it's going to cost you? But first, let me back up for just a second. I think it's a good idea. I'm in full support of doing this because I think there's a lot of future in it, and I think it's a very marketable type of thing right now because there's a lot of homeschool and a lot of that kind of thing that's happening. But I'm just wondering if what's going to be the cost? What's going to be the difference in the cost? So if someone could get back to me on that, that would be wonderful. My other thing was, I see a huge problem with kids doing this that have IEPs. It's really difficult to do this distance learning with children, obviously depending on your IEP. But I have a really big concern over the allocation of resources that are already stretched in that department, and then we're going to add another layer to it that we're going to try and do this with kids that are learning distance. And I don't know how we gauge social emotional growth in a distance model. I mean, what tells us that we've achieved success on social emotional growth in a distance model? To me, that's one of the biggest things that we would have to delve down into, because you can tell academically if it's working. I mean, that's pretty clear in a grade, or if they're at standards. But the social emotional growth in a distance plan, to me, I'd like to see how we would nail down the growth part of that. How do we determine success with the growth? And overall, I mean, that's, even if you're not in distance, if you're in regular school, it's kind of a hard thing to nail down, but especially hard if you're in distance because you never get to see them one-on-one potentially.
Right.
So I don't know if Lisa wants to jump into that, but.
Well, first, a couple of things. I think first with the difference in cost, absolutely we can get that for you. And one of the things that in our research that I found is we've projected 1 to 25 student or teacher to student ratio for this. However, I talked to North Branch last week, and they were saying they found success with mid to lower 30s for students. So we have the capability with the online learning to have maybe larger class sizes because it is more personalized and independent. Not saying we would do that, but we do have that option, so that might play a little bit into the cost. And then as far as the social emotional growth, maybe Dr. Fierro, maybe I'll have her talk to us a little bit about the DESA instrument that we would use to help assess that.
So in all of our schools, we have an SEL curriculum, and embedded within that curriculum, there are formative assessments that can be given or that are given by our classroom teachers. So they're collecting data on those pieces, and if they see any flags that might indicate that student needs additional support or additional help because they're not growing or showing the demonstrated growth that we expect them to on those assignments. So that's one aspect, and that's probably the most powerful piece, because those teachers are connecting with the students on a regular basis, as well as especially students on IEPs also have a case manager, a special education teacher that also interacts with them, and so there's kind of this two-pronged method built in. In addition to that, all of our students across the district take a screener, just like they do for our academics. We have a screener for SEL. In the past, it's been kind of a combination of a screener through FastBridge, which you've undoubtedly heard about, and or through Aperture Learning called DESA. We are switching to DESA district-wide next year, and the screener
is given twice a year, just like our other screeners are given multiple times. And the results of that, we collect the data and analyze that also, and then respond to that from a universal core instruction or through our multi-tiered systems of support with Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention. Just
Can I
like,
stop you right there for just
Yeah,
1 second?
yeah.
Is that information ever given to the parents, or is that only an assessment that's used with the teachers? 'Cause I've never seen that.
So it's been on an organic build with our district, but yes, moving forward, we will be sharing the results of all of our screeners with parents in a variety of ways. So, so I can't speak to the past because it's my first year, but I can speak to the future, which is that we are working towards a system of providing more information in a variety of ways, and that is one of the things.
Okay.
Yep. So those are kind of the pieces that we're working through. Also, in addition, I'll point out that there are actually some benchmarks around SEL, and we're working together with our curriculum leaders to kind of develop a package similar to that we have with our academic standards around some of these SEL standards as well. And so then you'll see that we can measure that growth and evaluate the progress of our students that way too.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Floyd, just to answer the question about students with IEPs as well, I think that the biggest difference between this year and next year is we'll be able to work with the families to really say if this is a good fit for the child or not, where this year by the governor's, executive order, we really can't say you can or can't be part of the Distance Learning Academy, but we will be, and as long as he doesn't do it another executive order for next year, we'll be able to work with the families to say this is a good choice or this is not.
But we can't turn them down, can we? Can we say if the child has an IEP, we can't say, no, you can't do the distance model, correct?
Correct.
So,
Okay. Yeah, I would say just in speaking with families all the time, I mean, this is a conversation that we have together as a team, similar to the IEP team. Like, is this a good fit? Is this working? And those conversations are happening in real time for me right now. And in some cases, it's not a good fit. And I'm working with the families to make that transition then if that's the case. Secondly, I was just going to say, we do use the second step curriculum every day with our students, K-5 right now. And it's been an interesting evolution in 10 weeks already. Teachers saying, oh, I know that lesson doesn't fit well for an online environment, but I need to add that lesson. I just had a conversation with one of my teachers today about this. Like, they are already starting to adjust on what are the goals in this type of environment for my students.
I just want to say again that I support this because I think it's a really good idea, and I have seen a lot of teachers make adjustments, especially teachers having to do labs and different things like that, where it's really, really hard when you don't have all of the kids in and they've really adjusted well. So I think it's a good thing. I want to make sure we're really looking at that other piece of it because I think that's important. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Newmaster?
Got two prongs, I guess, of what I'm looking at. One question was related to the budget question. As we look at offering another choice, and choices are good, but can we afford it if it's equal to, we've added another elementary school, and will it have a budget based on the FTEs and the number of students? All sorts of angles of special costs and things like that. And then I look at other programs, perhaps, that have more, and just think about the equity for, let's say, Willow, that has great need, but doesn't get special funding unless it's special government funding for low income, or another school maybe that does a huge fundraiser because they can, and then they have the wonderful outdoor whatever. But that's nothing that the school district pays for. That's, the parents have added this. So I'm all for choice, but I'm wondering, as we are cutting things, can we add and not spend more than we would have spent on this group if they were attending are multiple schools. So that's one question. Just plain old hard fact. Can we afford, it's like when we looked at orchestra, can we afford to add this? Hopefully, I love music, but can we afford to add this? And then my other question is, how many kids, and at one point I heard a number like 700, were going to continue in distance learning model once everybody went back to school? And we don't really know that yet, I don't think. They made kind of a commitment in January that they were going to continue. I don't know if that's been a hard line, if they did decide we really do want to go back. My kids want to be in person. So I guess I wonder how many of those kids that continued, that maybe had a reason like they're vulnerable for one reason or another to COVID. And that was a real strong determination. How many of the kids have that kind of a decision? Or it's a learning style choice, or it's a parental choice because of their choice. Maybe they're, for whatever reason, choosing this. So I wonder. Then I guess I've added a third question that I wrote down. As you're looking at the number of kids, let's say you've got 300, a small elementary school, and they're solid, and they start. Have they committed to not change schools then for the whole year? Do they have to? That would be a different thing for elementary kids to do, because they've done different, some of them maybe have done different models. And lastly, as we look at how retention is, I know how fluid that, because I've seen kids float in and out of online schools that are commercial ones at the high school level, and take it for part of their courses or part of their day or whatever. I'm wondering if you've talked to some of the online elementary schools that make it a business. How stable is their enrollment? That's it, a whole mishmash of questions. But a lot of it goes back to the money and the model, and is it sustainable?
Dr. Newmaster, those are all great questions. Andy, I don't know if you have more specifics for the budget or if it's helpful. Yes?
I'd really be happy to speak to some of that. Maybe I'll kind of join you up here.
Yeah.
So just on a number of fronts there, I've been involved on kind of the financial front, the staffing front, all of this with this programming, where I would say the cost comes in primarily is in inefficiency. So when you have neighborhood elementaries, for instance, like we currently have, that creates staffing inefficiencies within our system, and that exists. And it's okay, because we value some of those things in that setup. That's again where a significant part of any kind of increased cost would come here. It would be the same thing as if we were to open another very small elementary. It's less efficient in terms of how you're doing that. So there is a cost there. But the conversations that we're having in terms of staffing ratios, access to technology, those kinds of components really track with the student experience that we're talking about. So when we're talking about what do sections look like, here we're talking about that same average of 23.2 students that we see through the rest, and prioritizing primary grade levels, looking at intermediate grade level class sizes so that it's commensurate with the student experience elsewhere. So from that sustainability concept, I would say, we're really thinking about that, and from that, kind of equitable solution concept. When we talked about this as a building too, that is how it's going to be treated in terms of the student demographics and the needs of those students, regardless of what they are. So there's going to be people that are dedicated to that student experience in the same way they are now in other buildings. And those dollars and that commitment tracks with those students. So as a student with higher needs, for instance, would lose, and I'm not just talking about special education students, would leave a particular setting and go to a distance learning academy, those resources that would have been with them at Onika are going to track with them to the distance learning setting. So from that kind of an equity perspective, I don't think there's a huge concern. When we talk about the affordability too, we have to remember that these are our kids that are starting, this 13-year journey with us, and the cost of a family choosing to not participate in White Bear Lake area schools, where they don't become part of our market share there, is extraordinary over time. And so we want to capture those students. When you talk about can we afford this, I think you also need to ask that correlating question of can we afford not to do this as well, to offer this option for students. So that's just some of what we've been thinking through. We've really had a mind towards that equity mindset for, we want this to be, of course it's different, the model's different, but we want that student experience to remain consistent, regardless of whether you're at the DLA or whether you're at one of our physical sites in a more traditional setting. So, we're committed there. There's going to need to be a commitment from families that they're sticking with this, and I think the differentiator between this kind of a program and the for-profit or other online options that are out there is that there are kids, they're part of our community, and I think they're looking at different things here. I think it's a little bit more of a long shot that they're just going to choose something completely different that's out there, And if a student's not going to find success in a particular setting, we already work through that with them in terms of, do we have another setting within our system in which they can be successful? And I think it would be that same process. So of course we can't lock people in forever and a day and say we're not going to look at how your student's going to be successful. But we're also going to have to look for a real commitment from families so that we can ensure that we're running something that's sensible at the same time. So that's just kind of what we're thinking about on all of those fronts. So is there a cost? Yes. It's not a terrific cost, but it will create staffing and efficiencies in our system.
Can we lose students to distance learning academies now? Before we created this one, we've lost students to distance learning academies. You alluded to that. And so this may help us mitigate that in the future. But as Matt said, we'll lose students because the districts around us all created a distance learning academy this year. And they're all trying to figure out how are they going to keep their kids enrolled next year. And we need to be in that same position.
I understand that Osseo was the first one, I think, to get the state approval to have a distance learning academy. So I do think people are looking at that. But I'm just wondering if we've also looked at the ones that have been established for a while that were, because at the high school level at least, I saw the kids come and go in between as they changed their minds, and it was pretty fluid. We'd say, you're back. You were a month at Blue Sky or whatever. And elementary, I don't see that happening because the parents are making more of a commitment, I think, to do this, and they have to have the kind of household that can support this. So, I see that it would be more solid than maybe at an older age. I'm not sure. But I'm wondering, how many of our kids that selected to continue distance for the year have stayed in it now that things have loosened a little bit?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I think the maximum we got to was 640, maybe 641. I would say we're balancing out right now probably 632, if I had to guess, right in the low 630s. Because what has happened is we've had students, yes, leave. We've also had some students that weren't sure if they were going to go to St. Paul or not go to St. Paul or what are we going to do, that now have come back to us. I just spoke to a family on Friday that's moving from out of state, and this is the model they would like to choose as they enrolled here. So we've continued to see, for every couple of drops, a couple of enrollments. Mm-hmm. So there has been movement for sure. We did ask families for a commitment, but in all honesty, I'm not in the business of making families miserable or children miserable. So if there is something I can do to help them, I'm going to do that, and the other administrators in the district have been fantastic about that.
Well, and if they go from one model to the next, there's still, most of them, if they're successful and happy, they're in the district. I was just wondering, as we put a whole lot of effort and talent and energy into this, hopefully it builds as something that we keep talking about. Is this sustainable these days? And I don't know how, I've never researched how sustainable elementary online has been in the metro area?
I think that's the question of the day right now. I mean, as we watch all of our other metro districts doing this, we're all saying, how successful is this? How sustainable is this? I think it's a great question and something that we need to continue looking at.
Well, and I was thinking of the people that were there before we were because we had to be. These are the ones that offered it, whether it was through the Science Museum or whatever, that offered a learning academy, and there are some, more at the higher levels. But I just wondered, because I don't know how many of them are out there.
Yeah, and, I know Anoka Hennepin has done a lot of work with distance learning, and I talked to North Branch, and I know they've had a distance learning academy for 12 years. I think maybe what we are really used to is kind of that secondary model of that distance learning, and so that K-5 is a newer realm, but I know that there's districts that have been doing it, and, talking with North Branch just about the curricula piece of it, really those primary years are so important for literacy, and so really honing in on how we support families and students during those primary years of, are there opportunities where we could do some in-person kinds of check-ins and things like that? How can we look to volunteers that can help, with literacy and having kids, read to different folks that, we can check in to see how they're doing. And so, yes, absolutely, I think we need to continue having those conversations with the districts who have been navigating the K-5 online to learn what is working and how we provide more supports.
And again, I wasn't talking about districts, because that's fairly recent. There have been other ones, I know, because I see the advertisements in Minneapolis, St. Paul Magazine or whatever, but I haven't investigated them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Newmaster. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Sarah Florin from Technology. I wanted to add, I have very small experience with Cyber Village, which I think is, Dr. Newmaster, what you're getting at, that I believe it's a charter that's been around for a while. Their tagline is, "We like quirky kids," because they often have medically fragile or other students who are not fitting in a brick and mortar place. My experience with that is that they don't have a full-on robust district behind them offering services. They often have to contract out, or they sometimes turn families away if they can't offer the support. So I think we're unique in that we have robust services around this program that we've been showing are quite easy to drop in as we need to into a learning model that's online. So I think the ones that have been around for a while have a specific niche and it's worked for them. And I think we can offer more because we do have the resources, and they often have to seek those from districts, actually.
That's an interesting perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Selson, you're good? Dr. Arcan?
Yeah, I guess I want to say that I know that some of the school districts, and I know Dr. Fierro was on the ground floor when they started in North Hannibal, because her desk was across from mine. And for the last 6 years, we started at the high school because we saw funding leaving our district. And so we started at the high school level and have expanded it. And in the last 6 years, we've seen the high school expand every year with the enrollment of students wanting to come in. And like you, I know that Anoka Hennepin is now adding a middle school and elementary school to our academy to move forward. But the biggest thing was when we look at the finances, we watched so much money leave the district. This is an opportunity to recapture those funds and like we said, keep those students here with our bare attitudes and to educate them that way rather than, we were also seeing kids, like you said, off to this academy and come back earning no credits. And then they go here and they come back and earn no credits. And now they're a year or 2 years behind towards graduation so that we can control that. So that's huge. And I think that recapturing of those funds, though, for us would be great. And we can keep them in our system and support them with our system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arcan. Ms. Beloit.
Just
open enrollment work the same for distance learning then? So I can open enroll in Mountains View, or I can open enroll, okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much. Ms. Thompson?
Some of the questions have already been answered, but one of my questions would be for our educators and the staff that would be working in the, are we going to create a space for them, like when we have PD days and when they have training days, or they need to come into the buildings, they will have space that they can work in? Because I would assume their main spaces, they will be working from home doing the distance learning assessment?
Yep, that's a great question, and we haven't landed on anything yet, just not knowing how many students we'd have enrolled, and so I think those are all great questions, and one of the things that we're really in making sure that we are preparing our educators for an online learning environment. We know in a pandemic, they were able to do it overnight, but really providing professional learning of what best practices for online learning and online teaching. And so that's something that we really are making sure that our teachers feel supported, and, you know, having Ms. Walsh really connect with those teachers right now who are having success to learn from them and to say, you know, would this be something you'd be interested in continuing? So we don't know kind of what that workplace, you know, environment's going to look like yet, but that is something that we're really honing in on to ensure that our teachers have what they need to be successul with that teaching aspect as well.
And every staff member has a workspace now, and they would in that place too. We don't know exactly what that would look like, but every staff member would have access to a workspace for sure.
Well, and it could build to be, I mean, who knows what it could build to be, because I think COVID kind of just highlighted this was already starting, and it's just brought a whole new option available. So it kind of goes with our equity work, because there are a lot of students that could be considered to be marginalized who are introverts, right? I mean, all of us have, some of us are extroverts, some of us are introverts, and for some kids, going to school was like the most overwhelming thing that they could do in a day, because they had to go into this building with all these people, and every year they were going to be in a different class with different friends. And I've watched and read a lot of stuff about how this distance learning has really benefited those students, because they're home and they are learning and they're with other kids, right? But they're in their safe space, so then they're still able to, you know, and then they can still join in sports and they can still be a part of their community, but they can just kind of take away a little bit of that pressure of having to be in a space like this. So I think it's great. Answer some of the funding questions. I see the side where we could lose students, because this is going to be, I've already had parents talk to me about, I've always wanted to homeschool my kids, but I didn't have time or the energy to create and be the teacher all day long, but I can be home if somebody else can do that part, right? So I think it's great, and everybody's asked some good questions, so thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Other questions, comments? Okay, thank you all very much. Appreciate the information. With that, we'll move to our next discussion item, B4, which is the fiscal year 2022 budget adjustments. Mr. Wallace.
Do you guys need a quick stretch break while she's figuring that out?
Sorry.
Oh, no.
That looks really interesting.
That is really interesting.
Deliver right on the top of the
Uh-huh.
right there.
Thank you very much. All right. We'll try it again.
Okay, well, thank you. So we've been attending the last 4 board meetings with discussions about budget, and so none of this is new to you tonight. So given that you've been in your chairs a long time, I'll be efficient with this presentation. This is our annual budget process that we typically bring to the board when we're working on a budget process. So you can see right now we are between benchmarks. You approved the adjusted budget for the 2021 school year, and we are working on our, preparing our budget for the 21-22 school year. But in order for us to make plans for next year, we need some approval from the board on how we're going to approach our expenditures. And so we're in that in-between spot right now, and we'll be back to you at the May work session with the 21-22 budget, and then we'll ask you in June to approve that budget. So you're not approving the budget at this point, we're just asking you to approve the adjustments that we're making to our expenditures. We also reviewed at our March 1st meeting the budget adjustment guiding principles. I won't spend much time on those other than to note that our highest priority was minimizing the impact on classroom and with commitment to our equity statement. These adjustments need to be sustainable. One-year adjustments aren't helpful for us. They're helpful for our fund balance per se, but not necessarily for getting our expenditures in line with our revenues. Attrition is part of factoring in our reduction of expenditures. So as a teacher retires at the top of the pay scale and we replace them with a lower paid teacher, where we have more retirements than typical, those count as a budget reduction for us. We asked staff across the district to share ideas, and we received quite a few ideas from staff and building leaders. And we had a budget adjustment committee made up of district and building administrators who reviewed the proposals, and they helped us put the recommendation together. We've also reviewed this process with you along the way, and we are at the final step in here asking you to approve these budget adjustments. This is the same document, almost the same document we shared with you on March 1st. There's just a few adjustments. So first, revenue increases. So you certainly have to cut less when you can increase revenue. And we were able to make some smart moves related to special ed federal and state funding, where we could shift some funding federal staffing expenditures to state and get reimbursement. And that's because some laws changed in special ed funding that allow us to get more reimbursement for some of these positions. So we were able to shift some positions to state budget for reimbursement that wouldn't have qualified for reimbursement a year ago, and now will. We also looked at our third-party billing, where we have students who have health needs at school that we're providing. We can bill the Department of Human Services for that, and we do that already. But we're working with a consultant who has reviewed our budget and believes that we can increase our billing by about $175,000. So we're working on that. Staffing adjustments based on projected enrollment and department reviews. So this is really about adjusting our staffing to meet our current enrollment. So over the past year, our staffing has grown significantly, or has grown beyond what we targeted for our staffing levels. And so this is really using the staffing targets that we've had the last 3 years and getting our staffing back in line with that. So it's not an increase in class size beyond what was already targeted for class sizes. So class sizes are lower right now because we are overstaffed, largely because we have less students right now than we've had. And so we get those back in line, and there'll be some savings there. In terms of secondary, again, our secondary staffing is based on our student course selection, and so we see sometimes from year to year, we typically see some adjustments in FTE available in different departments. We'll see that again, and we are seeing that again this year. But again, we're not targeting an increased class size for our secondary schools. Supply budget reductions of $120,000. That's essentially 15% across our system on supply budgets, and we worked with principals on that, and they believe that that's a doable level. Software, technology, equipment, and contracted service reductions. None of those are really big savings, but they amount to $137,650. So we won't be renewing some subscriptions that our teaching and learning and technology team are working together to identify. We're extending our desktop computer replacement from 5 to 6 years. And we have a new vendor for our fiber maintenance agreement that will result in savings as well. Staffing shift from general fund unassigned to general fund restricted sources, and that's shifting some of our operational staff to sources where they qualify for paying those employees. So it'll save us a significant amount of money, and we're making those shifts now. And those would be operating capital and LTFM, pay-as-you-go LTFM that can absorb those expenditures. So the total is $3,284,685, and you'll note that that is $980,000 less than we targeted and brought to you in March, and for two reasons. One is we had $380,000 in retirement that we think we still may get. We just haven't quite finalized that yet. So working through a retirement incentive with the White Bear Lake Teachers Association, and we don't have it finalized yet. So we're still working on that. Those are difficult decisions for people to make, of course, and we want to be respectful and give people appropriate time to do so. We were targeting March 22nd for those because we thought we may be adjusting into licensed or ongoing contract staff, and we won't be. So that allows us a little more time to let that work. We also had $600,000 in reductions based on the school start time savings. And of course, that hasn't been approved by the board yet, and so we're not making the assumption, but for budgetary purposes that it will be. But should it be, then that would go into it. So we're looking at 3.3 million roughly, with the possibility of being in that $4.3 million range. Additionally, what's changed since we last talked to you is we're a little bit more optimistic about our revenue for next year because the American Rescue Plan has been approved federally, and that's going to lead to some funds, and as well as the state budget forecast has improved over what was initially expected. And so we don't have details on any of those yet on what our funding is going to be from the ARP, and in terms of the legislature, they're still doing their work. So, but we're feeling much more optimistic than we were a month ago. If you have questions, Andy Johnson, our Director of Finance, has done outstanding work preparing this work as we moved through the last couple of years. So she has probably helped me answer any of these questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wald. I know that the numbers have been in front of us for a little bit, but are there any questions for the adjustment? Okay. Thank you very much. We'll now move to our next discussion item. Is the first reading of School Board Policy 714 for the fund balance. I know that in the past, the School District Policy Committee reviews policies. I'm assuming that there's been some adjustments to this policy, and it's coming before us for the first reading. So is there any questions regarding that policy or any comments from Mr. Wald? Ms. Blood?
I just have one. So we've X'd out the review. I guess my question is, why did we remove the review of it? And two, this isn't something that we've done every year as far as I know, correct?
As far as?
Review this every year.
Well, the policy committee typically reviews the policies and brings
Well, no,
forth
this is an annual
an
review of
adjustment.
the sufficiency of the minimum assigned general fund balance levels. Is that why we're removing it?
You'd review that every time you approve the budget. The fund
Right.
balance percentage is before you every time you approve a budget, either through the preliminary or the revised. Is that what it's saying?
Well, technically, I guess we do it in some form, but not in a, I just want to know if that's why we're removing that portion of it, since technically we go over it during the approval of the budget process. Is that why we're removing that section?
I think from year to year, to look at the fund balance is tricky because our books don't close at the end of the fiscal year. So that goes on through the audit process, and then we review the budget at that point with the board, and then we look at where our fund balance is. So it kind of worked out that way this year, where We had that discussion, we looked at our fund balance, it led to a lot of discussion, we made adjustments to our budget, and then we said, let's take a look and see if this fund balance is right, so we began that process. Ms. Johnson did a review of other school districts around us to see where did their fund balance sit. What we found was that since we last approved our fund balance, we've become a bit of an outlier with the 12.5 to 16.7% fund balance requirement. What we found is most school districts of similar size to us were at about 8%. Most were exactly 8%. There were some outliers that were significantly lower, and there were some outliers, we were one who were significantly higher. But we believe that, in today's current school funding, in our current status, that 8% is a fund balance that's reasonable. It provides us with about a month of expenditures in the bank. Our funding is generally pretty consistent. We don't see huge waves from year to year.
Ms. Beloit.
I just was wondering if, I'd like to put forth that if maybe we keep this section, but the review is then posited as the yearly review as done during the review of the annual budget. Because I do think it's important that we do review this every year, because I think we're going to have a lot of changes over the next couple of years. So if we're changing it now based on what we think is an adequate number and an adequate percentage, I just think we should continue to review that and just have it in here as part of the policy that it's not necessarily a review on its own, but a review as part of looking at.
And that's how I read it. That's how I read it. But I don't recall why that was struck. I don't remember.
So I think the discussion about why we struck it is because it's not typically in policy that you require a formal review. When I would read that, I would think that would mean that the policy committee and the school board would act on the policy annually. And I don't know if that's
that's how I read it.
Okay, and my interpretation is the board reviews the fund balance annually, at least twice.
Yep.
Through the budgeting process.
Yep.
So I think.
So I read it the way she reads it, but having it read the way you read it is perfectly fine with me.
Yeah.
But we don't have it anywhere else in any of our other policies, as
Yep,
far
and
as I'm aware.
I think if push came to shove and we were at a rating call or something and the rating agency would look at our policy, they might look at that and say, so can you document when your formal review was? Because their policy says that you review it annually. So I think it's just, if our intent is that we review it as part of the budgeting process, I think that we should be explicit and spell out that that's what we're qualifying as a review.
Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying.
Yep.
Can we include that in there as the review?
Yeah,
So this is the first reading, right? So they'll bring it back for the second reading
It
with,
wouldn't take much to change that.
yep, with the adjustments and be able to move through.
Yeah, I think that would be sufficient.
Mr. Chapman?
Yeah, Ms. Johnson, that brings up a good question, I guess. As far as rating agency, do they typically ask about review of our fund balance?
They would look at our policy and they would evaluate whether or not we're meeting policy, and if we're not, then what our plans are so that we would meet policy. They would, in my experience, I don't think they've looked at when we've last reviewed it, but my former districts, we didn't have a review like specified in policy, if that makes sense. So I would anticipate though, if that was in, as it's stated now, I would anticipate them saying, so where is your formal review? Because they're very particular in their evaluation.
Okay.
But I don't.
But you're not aware
My
of.
answer would be, that is not what this means. This means the board reviews the minimum level at least twice a year, and this is when we've done it. I don't think that interpretation would necessarily be, I don't think it would be.
But there's not an
strike against it.
expectation that you're aware of, if it's not in policy, that they would be asking us and wanting to know if we're doing it, whether it's in policy or not.
Correct. Yeah, there's no
Okay.
expectation that we review it annually or any particular manner.
Other questions regarding the first reading of the policy? Okay, Okay, sounds like there'll be some adjustments and they'll bring it back for the next meeting for the second reading. All right, thank you all very much. We'll move into our first operational item, which is C1, which is the approval of the Elementary Distant Learning Academy application. Ms. Babish.
Yes, I asked the board tonight to make a decision on our application moving forward for approval from MDE for our K-5 comprehensive application.
So you've heard the recommendation. Is there a motion to approve that recommendation?
So moved.
A motion by Dr. Arcana, a second by Dr. Newmaster. Any discussion regarding the recommended action? Hearing or seeing none, just because I want to be safe, we'll ask for a roll call vote for this motion. We ask for the clerk, please read the roll.
Beloit.
Yay.
Chapman.
Aye.
Ellison, I. Mullen.
Aye.
Newmaster.
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye.
Arcan.
Aye.
The ayes have it, and the motion passes. Thank you very much, Ms. Babish. The next item on the operational item is action on the fiscal year 2022 budget adjustments. Mr. Wald?
Sure. Just moments ago, I presented expenditure adjustments for the 21-22 school year budget totaling $3,284,685, an amount that may increase to $4,264,685 in the coming months. Our recommendation is for the board to approve the budget adjustments as presented.
Thank you very much. You've heard the recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
There's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, motion by Mr. Chapman, a second by Ms. Beloit. Any discussion regarding the recommendation? Hearing or seeing none, this will require a roll call vote.
Beloit.
Aye.
Chapman.
Aye.
Ellison, I. Mullen.
Aye.
Newmaster.
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye.
Arcand.
Aye.
And the motion passes. Thank you very much. With that, before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I just want to ask, I was going to ask this tonight when Principal Bosch was in the room, but I know that they're doing some planning around graduation. I've been getting a lot of questions regarding that. So what I would ask is that in your one of Dr. Kazmierczak and an update that you're going to give the board, or maybe even at the next meeting, if you could just give us an update on kind of where they're at, where things are, so that we can answer community questions regarding graduation coming up this summer. I know the world's in a different place, but I know that I could say that I could just see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? And I know that a lot of families are feeling that way, so.
So Mr. Bosch was here, and he was prepared to comment. But I think planning is going on with prom and with graduation, and I don't know that he's got like specific details yet, but he was going to give an update. So I'll follow up with you even before the next board meeting about that.
Thank you.
With a written update to you as a board.
Thank you very much.
And I think he was working on a communication potentially for families this week, so.
That's brilliant.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
I appreciate it. With that, if there are...
Don, can I say one thing? So the feedback we're getting, sometimes it's caused by either, usually I think it's been cell phones that are too close to mics. So I don't know if that's going to be the answer, but sometimes that's what causes it. So just an FYI. So that, yeah, I don't know. And usually, I don't know about these, but anyway.
Can you hear me now?
So we'll try that next time, and
Can you hear me
it
now?
might disappear. So thank you, Don, for letting me mention that.
No, thank you very much. Appreciate everybody's patience for the evening. With that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Chair Mullen, I motion to adjourn.
I will second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.